to Horror with Marchese and Buller. Today we have Mark Nixon on the channel. Mark?
Good evening, gentlemen.
And Gary Buller, as usual.
Hello. Hello.
Okay. So, Gary, we were just talking about something before we caught on here.
The what we're drinking part, which seems to happen unintentionally every podcast. Today I am drinking mulled wine because it's Christmas and we bought 3 bottles. Yeah, it's very tasty, very nice. I'm not a wine drinker normally, acquired taste, but yeah, no, it's quite nice. The Asda stuff's lovely. Other stuff I'm not particularly fond of, but I really enjoy this one. Can I just say I'm really, really pleased to have Mark on the podcast this week. I've been looking forward to this for a couple of weeks. For those who don't know, Mark is it fair to say owner, Mark, for Shadows at the Door?
Editor and creator, I think.
Editor and creator of...
Owner implies it's greater than it is.
Of Shadows at the Door. Shadows at the Door, personally for me, was a real find. It was one of them when I was sort of trawling for submissions on, I think it might have been Submission Grinder, or I might have seen it on Twitter, and I clicked on it, and the artwork used on the website, I thought it was really fantastic. And I saw that you had the book out. I managed to get hold of the Audible of it. And I've said this to Mark before, don't take this the wrong way. I was sort of surprised how good it was. Yeah, very sort of, how would I describe it? Sort of Christmas ghost story style. M.R. James, oldie worldy, lots of crackling fires and inns and things touching the back of your neck in the darkness. Yeah, so to get Mark on the podcast is something I've been thinking about for a while. I didn't know if he'd accept or not, but I'm really glad he did. And just thought I'd say welcome, Mark, and thanks for coming on. Thank you.
All of that flattery will get me on any podcast. So,
So I'm kind of interested. How did it come about? How long has it been going on, Shadows at the Door? Because I think I discovered it about 2 years ago, maybe a little bit less than that.
yeah, it's a good question. I just want to, obviously, you've talked about you drinking mulled wine. I am a professional, so I've got a cup of Earl Grey tea, and I've also got a glass of water, Gary, in case, things don't go well. So while you're slowly getting drunk, and I don't know what you're drinking, Will, but while you're slowly getting drunk, I'm going to be quite professional and intelligent.
You need to leave that at the door, Mark. Professionalism doesn't go on this podcast.
Moving swiftly on from insulting the host. Shadows at the Door, I think, it's all been a blur, but I think it's been going on about 5 years now.
Wow.
Yeah, I only started writing about 5 years ago, and I have always loved ghost stories. And I said to my friend, I want to write one. And I wrote one, I sent it to her, she enjoyed it, and I said, I didn't even consider publishing it or submitting it anywhere. First story, you probably shouldn't. But then I thought, I'm going to put it on a blog. And I spent a whole day coming up with the title. And basically, the blog people read it and they enjoyed it, and it kind of took off, and I added more. And then I just thought, let's open it up to other people if they want to put on. I believe the first guest writer was a chap called Chris Holt, a writer I've grown to very much admire since reading his first story. And he's only ever gone from strength to strength. And that's kind of where I went. And the whole point of Shadows at the Door is I am just listening to what the people want. So if they want more stories, I'll put more on. If they started asking for a book, so I made a book. I made an audiobook as well. People said they like that. So, and I guess we can talk more later about what that means. I am but a public servant. And yeah.
So what sort of, in terms of anyone who's listening to this who might want to send their stories to you, what sort of stories turn you on? What stories are a big turn off? What is Shadows at the Door about?
Sometimes it's hard to find it, but I find the best description is probably quiet horror.
Right.
That is not necessarily a slow story in which nothing happens, but it's more about atmosphere, suggestion. I personally think it's very hard to scare people these days. We've all been desensitized and, quite young. So I can try and create a monster and then find out that there was a creepypasta about it 7 years ago that beat me to it. Or I can give a little suggestion and let the reader or the listener fill in the blanks. And I always think that's why films such as Alien and Jaws were that successful, because, you know, I mean, the minute you saw the shark, it was...
It lost a lot of fear, didn't it?
Yeah.
No, I completely see that. Yeah, I think quiet horror is quite a good description. And like you say, it's an art form to write something like that. It's really difficult because writers, especially new writers, tend to over-describe things, or as you say, try and be completely original and create a monster, as you say, or create a ghost, or try and make the story as sort of... try and cram as much into 3,500, 4,000 words as it possibly can, and then, you'll send it up to Shadows at the Door, you know. And like you say, it's really difficult to be very, very subtle and just leave that sort of chill that they get on the back of the neck.
Yeah, and Mark, you make a good point about everybody's desensitized and stuff these days. You know, you want horror, you just look at the news.
Definitely. But I guess this is why horror has so often reflected people's fears. I mean, look at all the zombie films that came about in the Cold War. Body snatchers and things like that. For those of us who do write horror, it is unusual to turn to something that is designed to unnerve you. But I recently described it to a friend as an anxiety that I have control of. I can do nothing about the Orange Man in the White House, but I can, and that anxiety is my own. But I can write a story that I know exactly where it's going, I know the rules of, and hopefully scare this out of somebody.
Yeah. I think as much. I've never, I don't think, read a story or a novel that has actually frightened me in the sort of what you think is like the traditional sort of jumping out your seat sort of frightened. And like I say, I think part of that sort of desensitization to it. But the ones that have stuck in my mind have been the ones that have got under my skin a little bit. I can't remember if it was you I was talking to about Pet Sematary, or I mentioned Pet Sematary to you. That as we'll get on to being a parent and a writer, later in the podcast, I think. But that got under my skin, big style. I remember watching the film, funnily enough, when I was much younger, and I watched the film before I read the book. But luckily, I'd forgotten quite a lot of it, or only the sort of pertinent moments in the movie sort of stuck in my mind. But reading the book since, it really gets under my skin, especially because I've got who's 15 months old and she's toddling, and it sort of plays with your mind. But it's hard to really scare someone. I never jump when I'm reading. Oh, that's very, very scary. But stuff does get under my skin.
I think that's definitely a very good way of putting it.
Yeah. And do you have any? This is a loaded question. Do you have any personal favourites on the website, or are there any that came in and you thought, wow, that's got to go either in the anthology or on the site? Straight away,
I won't say stories in particular, but there have been. There's certainly been writers who, when they, I was really ignorant when I started Shadows at the Door, because I wasn't reading a lot of authors who were still alive. I was reading the classics, and I was reading really mainstream stuff. But then I started seeing people who would submit one story, and I thought I'll look out for their name again. And off the top of my head, Chris Holt, Caitlin Marceau, KB Goddard, Christopher Long, certainly Pete Alex Harris. Certainly, these names were people who I'm always a fan of what they write, even when they're writing stuff that isn't even my genre. I'll read anything Caitlin writes, even if she's writing stuff that I wouldn't normally be interested in. So when I did come to doing the anthology, I did approach quite a few writers and said, I would really like you to submit something for it.
So how did that work? How did that come about, the anthology? Was it an invite-only thing? Did you put it up for submission? How did it come about?
You know what? It was a bit of a mess how it came about. At first, it was going to be invite-only. I wanted it because all of the writers who submit to the website are submitting, I'm publishing them and I'm not paying them. And it was, you could argue it was the exposure argument. But I did promise myself that I would do whatever I could to help these authors out. And, a few of them have fed back to me that has really helped them. And I thought, I really want to give you a paying job this time. So I sent out some feelers. I would say 90% of the people I wanted to be in the book said that they could do it. And then I wanted to do 13 stories because it's just a cool number. So I started reaching out to authors who I didn't know as well, read some of their stuff, and then it actually didn't work out with a few authors because they would then provide stuff that wasn't really a fit with the book. So actually 3 authors, they didn't end up being in the book in the end. So then I put out a general submission, which was terrifying because I then got about 180 stories in 3 days.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, it was crazy. I just put it on one website. I think it was Horror Tree. I can't remember. And the response was unreal. And then I was forced to choose a couple stories from the best, and those stories I really stand by them.
Yeah. Now, it's funny enough. I was saying to Will before you came on the show that you know Shadows at the Door is like a free market sort of thing, but there's a massive difference from sort of the writer's perspective with people like you and other publications that are free. I think to get on in Shadows at the Door, I think it's sort of seen as a bit of a boon, you know, as opposed to other free markets. It's just, you know, they accept any old story, but you're very selective about the stories that come on your site, and therefore it's more desirable as a writer to try and get on there, even though it's not paid, because you are so selective, and we know that what's going to be on there is going to be a very well thought out, edited, quiet horror story. You know, it adds value to it almost.
I think there's another one that's free that if you get on there, it's like a boon. It's called Pseudopod.
Yes.
I mean, when somebody sends something to you and you accept it, do you like go back with edits and everything?
I do. Well, yes. I treat them exactly. This is, to be honest, this is why I don't publish that much these days, because I treat it like I'm publishing it in a book. You know, I'll go back and forth with the author. We'll edit it. Some authors have not appreciated that feedback when it's not a paying job, and they don't want to put the work in. And I get it. And I have said I totally understand.
Yeah.
Shadows at the Door. If you can put in the work on this story and get paid for it somewhere else, it's totally fine. And people have left with notes on their stories that I have seen them get published elsewhere.
Wow.
After coming to us for help, and I don't mind that. I think certainly in my experience, the majority of my experience, this is an extremely supportive community, and I like to do my part for that.
Yeah. No, it's cool. That's cool. Like I said, the fact that you do edits to me just demonstrates the fact that you care about the story. And I can, like you say, I can sort of see the writer's perspective that you want to get paid for something or whatever. But at the end of the day, if you got so far as to, you know, be desired by the editor to get onto their website or into their anthology, you know, take the notes. You know what I mean? Well, just you know, you're not above that. You want the best representation of your story out there. Yeah. You know, I've said before on other shows, I've written stories in the past, and they've gone to free places that just don't edit. You know, they just literally take what's given to them and throw it out. You know, as a new author, you go, oh, look, I've been published, I've got an acceptance, you know, and then you look back on it like, no, I've been writing for 3 years almost, and you look back on it and you think, flipping it, that was a terrible story, you know. Whereas a note to get to Shadows at the Door, you got to really raise your game. You know, I think I've been rejected twice by Shadows at the Door. But I know that's fair enough. You know what I mean? Because you know that if I ever sent you a story and you accepted it, that it's worthwhile. You know what I mean? Same as with Unnerving, I was rejected 3 or 4 times before I got a story in there. You know? Yeah, you got to work at it, but you know at the end of the day, the story that's going to be publicised is going to be something you're going to look back on and go, yeah, that was a good story.
Yeah,
I'm completely with you on this actually, because the Gasling is a publication in Wales, and they have an extremely similar modus operandi to me, and a really similar objective, and they don't pay either. I have actually never. One of my writing goals is to be published by them, but I haven't sent anything yet because I know their quality is so good, and I'm waiting to have the right story for them at the right time. But one thing I will ask, and I would while we're on this subject, is if you are going to submit to somewhere that isn't paying you for it, look at what they're getting out of it. I make no money from shadowsatthedoor.com, and quite the opposite.
Yeah, you've got to pay for that, I assume. Yeah.
Exactly, I do, and you know, and it's a nice website I have to pay a lot for, and all the running costs. If I had loads of adverts all over the website and I was making money off it and I wasn't paying writers, I would not be able to sleep at night. So,
yeah,
I would just say to people, watch out. If you're not going to get paid for it, make sure that person publishing it is not getting paid for it either.
But then there's also the whole aspect of you doing the edits. Like if there's quality edits and you can really learn from it, sometimes that's worth more than the payment. I
would say yes, early in your career, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. It's not all about payment for me either, you know. Sometimes it's about ticking the box that you want to get into. Like you said, there's a publication in Wales that you would really like to get into, and that's, you know, getting an acceptance from someone like there is just as good as getting, I don't know, 6 cent a word somewhere else, you know. I mean, I was lucky enough recently. I got my first sort of semi-pro sale, and I was just really, really, really delighted with it. But in the back of my mind, I have a list of publications that I really want to get into, and getting into one of them is just as good, if not better, than getting into something that I've already been in before. If you know what I mean, and I'm getting a decent rate of pay for it.
I get that.
Yeah, Shadows at the Door. Yeah, it's definitely one on my list. I've tried writing the sort of story you like before, and sometimes I force it too much, and it just doesn't work. So I'm trying to tick all boxes, and I shouldn't be. What's going to happen is one day I'm going to lay down something that you're perhaps going to like, just by chance, just when I'm just writing something, and I think it'll come better unforced.
Yeah, I mean, if you have a look through the library on there, you'll see that it does branch out. I can't remember the name of it, but there was a story I published earlier this year, which is basically a transcript from a police officer's radio.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and I really liked it, and it didn't fit the format normally, but it was quiet and in the way we've already discussed. And yeah, I'm not stuck in a box. I know what I like, and I know what I don't like.
Yeah, exactly. So, and tell us a little bit more about the anthology itself. It was a really nice one. It's hardback, and I remember. Did you go to conventions with it and stuff?
I have, yeah. Thank you very much. Kind of a good and a bad thing about me is that I don't want to do anything unless I'm going to do it really well. So I probably could have published 2 books for the price that it cost me to publish that one.
Yeah.
Sometimes I wish I did. But I am a bibliophile. I absolutely love books. You know, I have this particular bookshelf in my living room that's got Folio Society, Cemetery Dance, Dark Regions Press. It's like all the really nice books.
Like proper book porn.
Yeah, book porn. I'm pretty sure if someone breaks into my house, I could kill them with my copy of Moby Dick. The Folio Society one is huge. He is a big whale. But yeah, moving swiftly on. And I really wanted Shadows at the Door to fit on those bookshelves. And when I visited friends and they have similar bookshelves, I'm very proud to see Shadows at the Door on that shelf. So there's a uniformity to it. And if I ever get the means to publish another one, it'll look the same. I'll probably make some very slight differences because the book is extremely heavy. And shipping it to America, I lose a lot of money when I do that. It costs me £14 to ship one book to America.
Wow. And
I charge £5 for shipping, so you do the maths on that.
Jesus.
Yeah.
The podcast was amazing. I got it on Audible as soon as it came out. And
the audiobook. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I was like, I wasn't expecting it to be, like I said before, I wasn't expecting it to be that good. I was like, this is actually really, really good, and the voice actors on it were fantastic.
Yeah, well, that was down to 9 Story Studio. So I had, I'd known Daniel Foyntek, who runs that, for a long time, and I remember just putting on Twitter saying, I want someone to read some stories for the website, but I, at the time, couldn't stand the sound of my own voice. And Daniel did them, and I think his experience of doing that kind of really spurred him on to take on some of the podcasting projects he did. So he and Cynthia did a really good job of that, and we worked with Cathedral Sounds to do the music as well, and I'm really happy with it. Yeah, it has been the most popular format of the book.
Well, it stands out. It's like I listen to audiobooks 90% of the time, and I've heard some pretty crappy audiobooks, and I've the professional ones as well. Let's put this into context. One of my favourite sort of British horror writers is Adam Neville. And he did an audiobook of his short story collection. I think it was called Hasty for the Dark as well. But he put it out as an audiobook, and they got this American guy to do the narration on it. And most of the stories in it were in an English accent, and it just sounded ridiculous. So he couldn't even do a good English accent. It's like Will trying to do an English accent. It's really terrible.
Will, couldn't I hear your English accent?
Go on, do it. Go on.
Like, what should I say?
Just say Shadows at the Door is my favourite.
Shadows at the Door is my favourite.
It's brilliant.
I'm glad I have a fan in South Africa. So, yeah.
But this guy who did the Adam Neville audiobook was probably just as bad as Will. And he was like, and the opening story is fantastic. It's one of my favourite short stories. I think it's called Where Angels Tread or something, about like this little haunted. It's like a play on the haunted house, the village haunted house story. And it's from the point of view of an English child who's sort of grown up and is sort of telling his story when he was much younger, and he's just like, my mummy once said, don't go to the haunted house. And it starts off like that straight away. I was like, oh, this is going to be terrible.
Well, you can exchange with Audible, which is good. Cause...
Yeah, I've kept it just out of because I like Adam Neville. But compared to Shadows at the Door, which is like really, really, really good and really well produced, and to say, like you say, that you're just doing this, no, they're going to see heart, but you're just doing this, free almost. Yeah, it's
well,
not free, but you did mention that you sort of pay the authors for the anthology, didn't you?
Yeah, I'm going to correct you there because
sorry, yeah.
No, it's fine. It's just so the anthology and the audiobook represented the start of an enterprise production,
right?
And everyone involved was paid for that. It was funded via a Kickstarter actually, which was really generous to everyone who. That's where all the money came from. I both made the Kickstarter too much and too little. It didn't cover all the costs, but then it was my first Kickstarter. But no, and I do, when someone buys the book, I do get a little bit of money for it, but that goes straight back in the Shadows at the Door pot, which doesn't even begin to cover the website fees or anything like that.
Yeah.
So I always hoped sales would generate another book, but perhaps I was a little naive.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. No, I meant like compared to like Adam Neville, who's like a professional writer, and he's obviously had all the professional, people doing his bit together for himself and stuff, and that's all I meant. I wasn't.
No, it's fine. Although Adam may be happy with that performance. I haven't read heard this audiobook, so I don't know. But I'm going to take your word for it.
If you want a good laugh, get it.
Well, I'm actually just about to start Apartment 16 by Adam because
I like that.
I have not read any of this Neville stuff yet, but a friend of mine recommended Apartment 16 is a good place to start. So that's where I'm looking at the paperback right now, and I will read you soon paperback. I promise.
Yeah, Apartment 16 is very good. It's a weird story in that it's in two parts.
Sorry. Start reading it. Then
no, sorry, Mark. No, just saying, what I suppose I can say is it's like two books for the price of one. There's like two completely separate things happening there. But I would definitely recommend The Ritual. That's my favourite. The Ritual.
I did love the movie.
Yeah, the book just blows the film out of the water by a mile. Yeah, it's just fantastic. The film basically covers the first half of the book. And again, in sort of Adam Neville style, the book's Ritual is like almost two parts to it. So yeah, it only covers the first bit, and then the second half of the book is covered in about 10 minutes in the film. So when they go to the village and all that. There's a lot of elements that aren't even in it.
That did feel a bit rushed in the film. Now that you mention it.
Yeah, there's like Norse gods and weird creatures in the attic, and there's not just like the creature that's out in the woods, the Mordor, the god. There's a lot more to it. The Ritual's fantastic. So creepy.
I'll put that on my list too.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've gone from sort of talking about the Shadows at the Door website through to your anthology and sort of going on to your fantastic audio production. So tell us a little bit of what you can, because I know it's sort of on the way, so to speak, but can you tell us a little bit about the Shadows at the Door podcast, the format, how it's going to work, when we're going to hear it,
Yeah, of course. Happy to. As I said before, the audiobook remains the most popular selling format of the book, ebook, hardback, and audiobook. Never got that paperback sorted. Yeah, and I like you, Gary, I am quite busy. I've got a long commute for work, so I usually have a book upstairs, a book downstairs, and I have an audiobook for when I'm walking or when I'm driving. And if it wasn't for audiobooks, I would be absolutely stuck for reading. And then, of course...
same, yeah.
Yeah, and there's loads of great podcasts out there. But then, I just listened to people, and people saying, when is there going to be a podcast? And I thought, is there going to be one? And And I had a lot of time to think about Shadows at the Door because there was a lot going on in my personal life for a good while. And I realized that, I've always loved audio drama, not just audiobooks, but hearing like a radio play. So I just started thinking about it. And then I was at a conference trading Shadows at the Door, and I met some guys from the No Sleep podcast, including David Alt, and really lovely guy. And then we got talking later down the line, and we decided to start to do the podcast together. It's the number of episodes has fluctuated, and it is going to be 9 episodes, and it's going to begin on December 21st, one a week, a ghost story for Christmas. So each episode will start off with an introduction by me. There'll be an audio play, which is normally it's between 20 minutes and 40 minutes. Now our gimmick is David is playing every single character.
Oh, cool!
Yeah.
Very clever.
It's I can't afford voice acting. No, but
as is often the case, though, Matt, something constricting you often brings out the most creativity. So.
Yeah, but it's a bit weird when David's like, "Oh, hello, I'm Mrs. Weatherby, and I've got a ghost in my office." No, not really. David is an absolutely phenomenal actor, and he, I would have laughed at the idea of him doing all of them if he wasn't so bloody good at it. And so far, the only person who's heard all of them, except myself and David, is Nico, who's doing the music, and he's actually said, "Who's the other actor?" Sometimes, like who else is doing it, and it is David. Huh. It does mean that it's an entirely male-led story for the first season, but I'm a little bit uncomfortable with that. But it is what it is, and it's only 9 stories, so we'll see how it goes. Yeah.
Fantastic. So I think you mentioned to me that it's going to be, like you say, like 20 minutes to half an hour, and then you're going to have a bit of a sort of Talking Dead sort of thing after it, where you go over the mechanisms of the story, I assume, just talk about how it came about, and is that what you're going to do?
Yeah, kind of. So there is going to be a discussion segment afterwards, but as I said, I do listen to a lot of podcasts, and what I don't like is when I hear a podcast and then everyone involved is on afterwards, and then they're basically just going, "Oh, David, you were great." "Well, Mark, you were great too." And I don't want that. It's cringy, and we're already conceited enough to put out a podcast. We don't need people to hear that. So what we do is we talk a little bit about the story, why it was chosen or why it was written. And then we talk about the themes that are involved in it. And then what seems to always happen with David and I is that we somehow get talking about particular writers, particular TV shows. And quite frankly, we have a bit of a laugh. So it's a very serious horror podcast. And then by the end of it, we're having a really good laugh at the end.
It'd be really funny though, if like, the little play bit ended and then you sort of, it's just a moment out and you sort of go, "Wasn't that?" And then they go, "Yeah, that was real. Oh God, wasn't that awful?" And then you just talk about how bad it was for half an hour.
Well, we are both British, Will.
we don't beat about it much. So, who writes these stories? Who's written them?
Well, there's a mix. I've written most of them because I haven't actually published anything in a while, and I feel quite bad when I see people like you guys publishing stuff, and I'm like, well, I haven't got anything to show because all of my work's gone into this. So I've written how many? 1, 2. I think I've written 4 original stories. I can't even count. My life has been this podcast. But then, so I've written a few original stories. Some of them are adaptations of stories that were on the Shadow. Like probably one of the most popular stories on the website is one of mine. So that one has been adapted into episode 1. There's another one, and we've adapted a few classic stories. And the people we've adapted are Washington Irving, Charles Dickens, and M.R. James. We've also got some familiar faces. I've got Pete Alex Harris, who people will know was on the website and in the anthology, and I've got Christopher Long. There was going to be somebody else, but they did drop out, which was a shame. And also, we have Gemma Amor, who approached us.
Yeah, I was going to mention Gemma. We had her on the podcast. Yeah, I can't remember what it was now. We had a
couple of months ago, wasn't it?
Yeah, we had a really unprofessional one where it just kept cutting out, and Will had to keep stopping it. And then we had one with the whole cast of the Calling Darkness. And yeah, Gemma mentioned that she was working with you on something. I was like, oh, that's really, really cool, because as you know, I listened to the audiobook and I was quite intrigued to see what you do with the podcast. But yeah, it's interesting. I love the fact that you're going to throw it out just before Christmas as well. Just the thought of sitting there in front of the fire with some alcoholic beverage, listening to the scary stories, it's quite compelling, actually. It's quite exciting.
Well, it's a tradition in our country, isn't it? But I'm usually quite annoyed that there's not much horror stuff on at Christmas like there used to be. Now this year, there's actually going to be a load. It's going to be quite nice to sit in amongst all of that.
I was going to ask you actually one of the questions when I was thinking about you sort of coming on earlier in the week. One of the things that popped into my head, a question I was going to throw your way was, why are Christmas ghost stories so popular? What makes them so sort of digestible over this time of year? A time of year it's supposed to be sort of happy and enjoyable, and we're basically throwing ghosts and horror at you. What makes it so good, and what are your personal favourite Christmas ghost stories?
Oh, I love this question. Strap in, boys. No, so you've asked me two questions there, and the first one, why are they so popular, is, well, because the winter solstice was actually, in the pagan calendar, was considered for lack of a better word, the spookiest time of the year, where people could communicate with relatives who had gone, and there was a number of spirits who were particularly perceptive to communication at this time of year. More so than Halloween, actually. I've never really gelled with Halloween myself, and I always have done with Christmas. I think that's why. The other reason, so there was always a little bit of spookiness about Christmas, and then that tapered off. And then a man called Charles Dickens wrote A Christmas Carol, where that was his agenda, to make Christmas a really big deal for his time. And of course, he includes 4 ghosts in that story. 5 if you look at the Muppet version, where Jacob Marley is 2 guys. Which I very much do.
I love the Muppet version. We watch that almost every year. It's fantastic.
Yeah. So there's that, and then M.R. James, one of my heroes, if not my writing hero, he started reading a ghost story for his chums on Christmas Eve, and that was a very regular thing for him before he started publishing them. And the BBC started adapting them in the 60s to 70s. And putting them on at Christmas. So you're looking at quite a long period as to why ghost stories are linked with Christmas. But I also think it's because it's dark, it's spooky, it's cold, you're a little bit drunk on mulled wine if you're Gary, and you're susceptible to these things.
Pissed as a fart, I think, is the phrase you're looking for there, Mark. But I agree. I think it's not only that. I think it's the fact that it's cold, it's dark, it's it's sometimes wet, and over in the States you might have snow if you're lucky, but you're inside, you're nice and warm, you're with your family, you have the lights, your house is decorated, and to sit there nice and snug and warm and just hear a little bit of a whisper from the outside, I think that's great, because it makes you tremble in all the good ways. You know you're safe, you're warm, but you can hear this story, and it just gives you a bit of a jolt, I suppose. That's what I like about the Christmas ghost stories, anyway.
What about yourself, William?
Christmas ghost stories, they're good because, like Gary said, you're in that warm environment, everything's cozy, everything should be going a certain way. And then it kind of takes you out of your comfort zone. I mean, most of horror is like that anyway, but around Christmas, you really don't expect anything evil like that to happen. I've had a couple of acceptances for stories around Christmas time, and they've been the funnest stories to write, really.
I guess what you're saying, William, is that the weather outside is frightful. It's so delightful.
Since there's no place to go, Will.
Let it snow.
Talking of Christmas, sort of a neat little segue there. You have kids, am I right?
I do. No, I do. I do. I have 2 twin girls, and they are born. They were born 1 week before Christmas. They're little Christmas babies.
Wow, fantastic! So you got their birthdays coming up soon.
I do.
Do you have them over Christmas, or?
Yeah, I do. Yeah. We kind of have, like, they spend half a day with me, half a day with their mum, and then I see them most of Boxing Day as well. So, yeah.
Wow.
So, how old are they now? Sorry.
They're going to be 2 in a couple of weeks.
Oh, such a good age.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've got an 8-year-old and a 15-month-old, and it's just fantastic. She's at that stage where she's sort of developing a bit of a personality of her own now. She's not walking yet. She's sort of doing the thing where she climbs up against things and sort of scoots around. But, her older sister was very similar. She was very late at walking. But I'm kind of intrigued to know, you sort of mentioned all this sort of work with the podcast and stuff. How do you fit all that in and being a dad as well? Do you think being a dad affects your writing? Do you think it affects the type of stories you put out there?
Again, I feel like you've asked me two questions.
Yeah, sorry, I'm terrible at that.
No, it's fine. It's fine. So I'm going to answer the easy one first. Does it affect my writing? What is really interesting is I'm about to have a story published in the Lift podcast that is all about a single dad, and I actually wrote that before I became a dad, and I edited it. Like, I literally wrote it, became a dad, and then a year and a half later came back to the story and edited it. And I did change a little bit, and particularly the ending, because obviously my feelings were reflected in that. So the last few paragraphs of that story are quite, well, soppy, because that's what it's like. Yeah, I don't deal with children a lot in my work. I don't know why I don't, but I guess not. But how do I fit it in? Well, it's a sad answer. I am a single dad. Let me rephrase. Single dad implies that I live alone with them. I don't. I have a very good relationship with their mum. So they live with their mum. They come to see me quite a lot. It does mean that you're left with time to yourself. So I work full time as well. So I just organize my time really well. And then when you go from having no kids to twins, you suddenly think, what the hell did I do with my time before? So you promise to yourself, if you ever get half an hour ever again, it'll be the most productive half an hour you ever get in your life. So I just organise my time really well.
I don't know about you, but I can't have the girls in the room sort of playing or whatever and write at the same time. I find it really, really difficult because quite rightly, they sort of demand your attention a little bit. So most of my writing these days is when they're both in bed, so it's like they go upstairs, I whip the laptop out, my other half will watch whatever she's watching on the television, and I'll just sit there and do some writing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So is it similar to you, or are you?
Well, because I really value the time I have with them. You're so grateful for that time that your phone is looked at for most of the time. So I wouldn't even dream of writing while they were there, because even when they're asleep, I'll just sit and look at them creepily. So
not even your kids.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
No.
I'm just really grateful for my time with them. So when I'm with them, the ghosts and stuff aren't so much there. Although I have a lot of spooky pictures around my house, and my kids look at them and they go, "A ghost," and I'm like, "Yeah, it's a ghost," and hopefully you won't be frightened of it. So
yeah. I had this bizarre moment about a month ago with my eldest, who's 8. And my dad goes shooting quite regularly. And sometimes he'll bring back, ducks and things. And I'm fine with doing stuff like that, as long as, you don't waste what you're doing. You're not just doing it for the sake of doing it. So quite often he'll fetch me a couple of ducks or something, and I'll sort of gut them and sort of clean them out and stuff, ready for cooking. And I sort of this strange moment where I was sort of cutting the head off this duck, and Holly, my eldest, she insisted on being there and watching it. And it was just such a weird thing, just ripping the insides out of this dead animal with her there. But at the same time, in a weird sort of way, it was almost like a bonding thing, because I think she understood that when you buy something at the supermarket, it didn't just appear there. I think it's quite important sometimes to understand where your food comes from and stuff. But it was a weird sort of unexpected bonding moment, in a weird, bizarre sort of way. But
interesting.
Yeah, me and Will have always said. We were saying last week, well, one day we're going to do a show where we're just going to bring the girls on, because Will's got your daughter's. How old's your daughter, Will?
6.
She's 6. So, what about you, Will? Do you write when your daughter's around, or how does it work with you?
I'm more in what Mark was saying, where you want to spend every moment you can.
Yeah.
Sometimes I will if she's just watching TV, but nothing really gets done. It's mostly just quick edits that I do, and I don't really expect to get that deep into it. Mostly, it's sometimes when I'm putting her to sleep or something, I'll edit. I'm editing the podcast now, so I'll be editing that, and she'll, it's still something where she'll turn over and say, "I can hear that," I can hear. And so I'm I just put it away until she's asleep.
And do you think being a dad's affected your writing, Will? So I know you've written a couple of short stories where there's been a child in there, and it's, like the one about the mirror that you wrote, which was that was a little bit heartfelt, and that was a little bit sort of sad. from a that sort of child sort of perspective.
Yeah.
Did you think that's influences the way you write it?
So that story is almost in the way, again, like what Mark said, where to cherish every moment. That's sort of like if you lost those moments, that's what that story sort of reflects. But I feel that it's a challenge, but then also what Gary was saying at the beginning of the show, where the challenges sometimes make you work harder and bring out that extra something you didn't know you had. Because you're working your way around some obstacle. Not that it's an obstacle, but I mean, obviously, if you're by yourself, you're going to have so much time to think and read and immerse yourself in the craft. And it's a little more tricky when you have kids and obligations like work and family. But you still find a way. And sometimes, there's a writer. His name is Chuck Palahniuk.
Yes.
Yeah, and the way he wrote was he was so busy, and he wrote in between breaks at work. He would jot down like maybe scenes or something, I believe he said, and he put them together later on at night when he had when he had the time. But these little scenes, and it basically shaped the way his writing was and how his scenes came about in the books and everything. It was very interesting to see how he used what he had. There's some writers who go into the bathroom and they turn their cell phones on and they start, jotting down something on Word or something, and they'll use like audio programs to maybe speak some ideas during lunch. And then when they get a spare moment, they'll, peck away at their phones and type it in. It's just so
more
many
fiber in their diet would hit their writing career, though, because then they wouldn't be there anymore.
That's true. That's true.
It's absolutely.
I'm feeling it's quite interesting hearing all this because, as somebody who does get a lot of time to themselves, I feel like I should then say, oh yeah, and I'm writing all the time. I'm not, because I don't know if it's just that kind of show, but I have a number of mental health issues. So, I'm struggling with that a lot of the time, and my writing time has to be a time where I'm on my own, where my mind is clear, or sometimes I can power through something by writing. But that can be a huge obstacle to writing. One that I'm not ashamed to admit either.
No.
Even though this podcast has been an insane amount of work, it might have come out a little bit earlier had that not been an issue.
Yeah. Did you, obviously it affects your writing and stuff, but how much so? I don't want to obviously probe into particulars, but how does it affect the way you're sort of thinking day to day in terms of sort of getting words on the page, or even sort of doing the shadows at the door thing?
I think we all get imposter syndrome a lot of the time.
Mm-hmm.
Stuff like that. But for me, the biggest hurdle is normally the first 3 paragraphs. Mm-hmm. I have so many stories in my hard drive that are not like they're jotted out, or there's only 2 paragraphs. I've never been able to get past them. If I can get past that 3 paragraph hurdle, I can normally finish the story. I bought this beautiful poster from Neverwhere. I'm going to get it framed and put on the wall in the room where I write, and it's These Rules for Writing by Neil Gaiman. And I think, like, rule 1 is write, I think, and rule 2 is finish what you write, and that is my biggest thing, is finish it. Even if it's bad, just finish it. And but I style myself a mental health advocate, because I think we all need to talk about it more. And hopefully, if anyone's listening who also struggles, they won't feel as alone. Just powering through and finishing a story. I actually finished the story yesterday, and I was so proud of myself, because it had been a while.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I mean, there's different levels and degrees of mental issues. I have more of the anxiety, that side of it, and I sometimes feel blue. I feel down. The next day, usually I can, start the day fresh, unless I remember something that's really strong on my mind about whatever was getting me down. It might linger a couple days, but I definitely know, like when I was a teenager, my mom passed when I was 13, and I know how it feels when you're going through that and you're reaching out, and sometimes people, they don't notice you're reaching out for help, and it's a whole bunch of different emotions and mingled mess inside your mind, Yeah.
There's a reason why most of my characters are normally quite awkward, or there's usually something going on with it. I wrote a story for the No Sleep podcast, actually, that I wrote pretty much the time that all the stuff with Harvey Weinstein and Kevin Spacey was coming out.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And it was a direct response to it, because I was just getting so angry hearing about it, and I thought, I'm going to I'm going to give these what they deserve. And I put it into a story that it was received quite well, actually. So, writing can be a reflection of events or what's going on in your head.
Yeah.
And the amount of short stories I've read where I've turned to the author and I said, is this an allegory or a metaphor for depression? And it nearly always is.
Yeah.
And I think it's remarkable that people can use that to create something beautiful out of something really, really messed up.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's quite interesting to read that, because everyone's different. Everyone has different sort of problems, for want of a better word. And sometimes, like you say, something beautiful is born out. There's a lot of writers out there who do have mental health issues, and it translates onto the page as something quite unique, quite interesting. So.
Yeah, and sometimes at different levels and degrees that, look at a lot of writers, they have mental illness. Sometimes they say that you have to be crazy to write because you're basically having conversations with a whole bunch of characters inside your mind. Writers sometimes go crazy if they're not careful because they are in these worlds that they're creating, and sometimes, I think there was a Stephen King book, Lizzie's Story?
Yes.
Yeah, where the writer had died, and she's basically cleaning up his stuff, and she realizes that he actually went to a real place inside his mind, and it's sort of, I think it does reflect what writers go through.
I think creative types tend to be quite susceptible to these struggles, but I don't know if I would agree with the statement that everyone has to be mentally ill, but I would kind of agree with it, but then just say everyone has their own story.
Yeah.
And some people may not give themselves that title, or they may not have struggled in a way that somebody else has struggled, or they may have perceived it differently. And I just, I do think there's a lot of each writer and what they write. There's a theory that M.R. James, for example, was a non-practicing homosexual because there's a lot of gay stuff in his story. And a lot of men afraid to be touched and stuff like that. And I think you can't help but look into that. And I do think there is evidence in that kind of thing. Look at King, when he was going through his addictions. The Shining.
Yeah.
Come on, that's one of the most obvious ones.
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah, I have this sort of strange thing where I think I've said before, I don't like friends and family reading my stories. I find it's a weird thing, and I don't know if it sort of harks back to I kind of internalize any sort of issues or problems, and I like to sort of keep guarded in that sort of way. And I think that sort of reflects me, and I'm comfortable with friends and family reading my stories because when I write a story, I feel it's a very personal thing. It's okay somehow to sort of pass it out to non-judgmental strangers, but for friends and family to read it, I'm kind of scared that they're going to look at it and go, where did Gary get that from? I don't know. It's a strange thing. It's quite hard to describe.
Like they're going to analyze your mind.
Yeah, exactly. And as I say,
I analyze his tweets, never mind his story.
Yeah. The less said about my tweets, the better.
Yeah. I will say though, Gary, I wouldn't have been able to articulate it like that for a long time, but I feel the same. My ex-partner, if I wrote any character who was a sex offender or anything, she would kind of read it with one eyebrow raised and I'd be like, hey,
yeah.
It's just a character, and if every character is a white British guy with mental health issues, then that's going to be boring. So I've got this novel idea, and the main character is going to have to be freaking awful, and I'm like, I just have to not care who reads it. In fact, on Sunday I'm going to be reading a story out for an audience, including a lot of friends at Newcastle Castle. I hope a lot of friends. I hope they bought tickets. And I've just had to say to myself, it's just not imagine it's them. You're writing it for this constant reader who you don't know. Not them. So I
Exactly.
I'm glad it's not just me. It's weird because my theory behind it is, like I said, I think my mum passed away last year from cancer. She had quite a 3.5 year battle from it, and it was really, really difficult. Obviously, you break your heart. It was really, really sad. But I never let anyone see that, and it's not me just being the archetypal strong male. I'm the head of the family. It's just me. I feel really uncomfortable sometimes conveying my emotions in that sort of way.
Yeah.
Especially those close to me. But I find it a lot easier to write something quite personal and send it to say Will or you, or even send it to my immediate family. You know, it's a strange thing. I don't know if it's a judgment thing. I don't know what it is. I just like to protect them from stuff like that, and just like I treat them like a firewall, and you know, I keep everything sort of outside of that if I can. But I had quite a funny story about well, not funny, but one of my neighbours purchased my short story collection, and I was out. I think I was throwing something in the bin outside, and he came out. He's quite an elderly chap, and he sort of said, "Gary, I just read your book." And I said, "Oh, did you really?" And he's like, "Yeah." And then he just sort of gave me this funny look and just shut the gate slowly. I was like, right, okay.
Don't come to my house anymore.
Yeah, that's it. So, which was quite funny, but yeah.
You're not welcome at Christmas.
That's it. No, I can't sort of have you on here and sort of not talk about. You obviously like Inside Number 9, and you like the League of Gentlemen, which Will may or may not know. Two sort of comedy series over in the UK that are quite popular. They're quite dark.
Americans have never. Sorry to generalize, Will, but every American I've shown the League of Gentlemen to has not jailed with it.
Yeah, it's
I
very dark. Yeah,
I like that other. My sister got into like some British comedies, and there was one called Red Dwarf.
Oh yeah,
but I mean, it's nothing like what you're talking about.
It's nothing like Red Dwarf. You've just seen British and been a bit offensive, actually, if I'm honest, Will.
The Red Dwarf from you know, the British Red Dwarf compared to the American, I think is much better.
Yeah, I've only seen like one episode of the American Red Dwarf, and it was quite poor.
Yeah, like they were trying to copy it.
Yeah, but the League of Gentlemen's absolutely. I can't really comment as much about Inside Number 9 because I've not seen as much of it as League of Gentlemen. But
you really need to rectify that. It's fantastic.
But the League of Gentlemen is it's dark. It's crude. It's I don't know how you describe it really. But what makes
it's very real. It's I for my day job I run a centre for adults with learning disabilities, and I don't know how much you remember the show, Gary, but I always feel like I'm legs akimbo when I'm doing it, like Ollie Plimsolls.
Yeah.
I just feel like I'm going to snap one day and just go, "Don't touch me, you puff!" You know?
What my personal sort of connection to that TV series is it was filmed in the village where I grew up.
Yes.
And on a daily basis, I saw them filming scenes, and I met all the people who were in it. And, you know, like every day you'd sort of walk past them, you know, as they were doing things, like literally to the point where, but at the time with the first series, I didn't even know who they were.
Yeah.
You know, because I was like 13 or 14 when it was being filmed. But one sort of moment that sticks in my mind was I was at college, and we used to go to the chip shop for our lunch. And we went into the chippy, and we stood there, and I was waiting for them to. I used to stand outside because I didn't want to smell of the chippy, you know. And I stood there just leaning against the window, and this hearse went past with "bastard" in the window. I was like, oh, okay, that must be that thing that they were filming. But I think, it's one of my favourite things on television ever, The League of Gentlemen. The first series, it was like, I sat and watched it with my parents. It was just really weird and really inappropriate. But
I watched it with my parents.
Yeah. Well, it was like the legs akimbo thing. It's really funny because that was filmed in our school. And I remember them being there and turning up in full costume and, you know, doing what they did, sort of thing.
So it was kind of like this group of like traveling actors who would go to schools, and they would have written a play about AIDS or something, and it would be the most patronizing, condescending, cringy stuff. But, you know, I don't know about Gary's neck of the woods, but these people were real who would come to our schools. Like, you know, they would be very much like that. So I guess that's where a lot of the humor came from.
When you watched it when it came on, it was like a sort of like a tick list of like various places around the village, you know, and it'd be really funny because you'd watch them walk off camera in one part of the village, and then they'd sort of walk back on in another part of the village, even though it's supposed to be the same journey, you know, and it was really interesting to watch. But the Christmas special's amazing as well. Watch the Christmas special like every year. My dad absolutely loves it. It's just so funny.
Terrifying.
It's absolutely terrifying. But I was given an opportunity to be in an episode when I was there. And
what?
Yeah, I know. But at the time, didn't know what it was. Didn't you know? You just knew someone was filming in the area, you know. And my friends are in it, but I'm not because I chose to go to my grand's for my tea instead. So now I look back on it and I'm really, really gutted. But it was like the first series. I mean, even series 3, which isn't as popular as the first 2. I did quite like it, and the way it all sort of tied in together at the end. Plus the scene where Pauline's getting bummed is fantastic as well.
How can you find?
You know, everyone always thinks that she's getting bummed, but like it could just be
she's not. Yeah,
normal sex.
Yeah, it might be. Yeah, it probably is. But
how can you find this in America?
I don't know.
I think it might be on Netflix over there, actually.
Yeah, I don't think you like it, Will. I don't think in America, like, not being offensive, but I don't think you get it.
Give it a try, Will. Don't let us patronise you.
It's really English, though. You know, it's really. It was filmed in a small village in England on purpose. You know, and like you see the cenotaph at the beginning, which is at the top of the road where I grew up and stuff. And it's just the village I grew up in was tiny. It's one of those places you knew everyone.
Yeah.
You know what I'm hearing here, Gary? I'm hearing, you know what, Will? This show's brilliant, right? It's filmed in my village, and you wouldn't like it because you're shit. And me and Mark, we like it because we're British. Yeah. This is revenge for dumping all that tea in Boston. By the way, I don't know where that Gary impression came from.
That was awful. It didn't even sound anything like me.
Didn't sound like me at all.
So for someone who doesn't really know a lot about Inside Number 9, which is, for those who don't know, it's got 2 of the 3 actors from the League of Gentlemen, is that right, isn't it?
Yeah, let's put it as 2 of the writers, because the League were a 4-man team, although 3 of the actors.
Yeah. So for someone who hasn't really watched it that much, like my parents, my mum's not around, obviously, my dad really likes it. What's it about, and is it similar to the League of Gentlemen, or is it something completely different?
I would say it is only similar to the League in the fact that there are 2 familiar faces in it, and the sense of humour is there. All you need to know is an anthology show. Every single episode is completely different. The only thing linking them is that they take place in a 9. So the first episode might take place in house number 9. The second one might take place in cubicle number 9 of office. Or it might be, if there's one episode which was about a size 9 shoe, you know, so that is the only thing linking them. But they are so brilliantly written, and some of them are outright comedy, and some of them are outright horror. And they recently did a Halloween special that was absolutely phenomenal.
Was it live? It was live, wasn't it?
It was live, and I don't want to say anything else because it was so ingenious, and they gambled with it. They so gambled with it, and they actually made it interactive. So if you were on Twitter at the time of watching it, it was all the better for watching it at the same time.
Oh wow! I remember it sort of being on, and I can't remember what I was doing. But yeah, no, I remember hearing it was live and being really intrigued by it, because I've seen live shows before, you know, particularly the soaps for some reason, like Coronation Street and stuff like that, and it's you just watch it to watch someone mess up, you know.
Well, that's it, you know, and I think they played on that a little bit, but I actually remember seeing, and I tweeted at one of the writers, and I said, I am angry because I will never write anything that clever.
Oh, you've really built it up now.
Oh yeah, well you need to go watch it once you are done recording it, then.
Oh, I do. I'm going to start from the beginning, I think, with it. And work my way through. But one thing I was going to mention earlier, and I'm just sort of going to go back a little bit on a tangent, is when you talked about the podcast and stuff. Have you listened to the Bafflegab Hammer Horror collection, the audio one?
Yes, I have.
Because they're so good.
Their production of Blood and Satan's Call is amazing.
Yeah,
I absolutely love it. And they released a Hellraiser adaptation, more specifically the Hellbound Heart, which was amazing. And they're about to release an M.R. James adaptation starring Reece Shearsmith, and I am so excited for it. Biffle Bab and Big Finish are 2 very big influences for Shadows of the Dollar podcast. I aspire to their quality, and I really hope that we have nailed that, but I guess you guys and others will decide when it comes out.
Oh, hopefully. I was introduced to them through the Hellbound Heart thing, and I just saw the artwork online. I can't remember the gentleman who was retweeting it. It was one of the people that was involved in it. But yeah, I thought, oh, I'll give that a go. And then about a month or two ago, I bought they were doing a bit of a Halloween special, and all their audio CDs were £6.66. For a Halloween.
Yeah, nice.
So I got hold of the Hammer collection. I was talking to Will about it on a previous podcast. But the first episode, have you listened to the Hammer one? Sorry, did you say?
I haven't heard the Hammer one. No.
The Hammer one. The first, I think it's 6 episodes. Each one's about half an hour long. The first one is called The Box, and I listened to it in the car. I was going to see my dad, and on the drive, it was just the right amount of time to sort of drive over there, and I was literally getting goosebumps on the back of my neck when I was listening. The ending to it is just so clever.
You've got to be careful where you listen to audio drama. I was listening to that Hellbound Heart one when I was in Dublin, and I had headphones on, and there was like a really loud sex scene going on. I walked past them,
I remember that,
and they looked at me and I thought, they can hear what I'm listening to, can't they?
You do have to be careful. But no, it's fantastic, and definitely give it a go, Mark. I'm surprised I missed it. As a connoisseur of British horror, it'd be right up your street. I mean, there's a couple of episodes out of the 6, there's 3 or 4 that are very, very good to sort of okay, and then there's 2 or 3 which I didn't like as much. But the ones I think to look out for are The Box and The Devil in the Details. There's 2 that are just so clever. And I think what reminded me again about it was the fact you say about how clever Inside Number 9 is, or the live show was, the way it was filmed. It just it just reminded me of that, because The Box, just thinking about the ending still gives me sort of, the hairs on the back of my arms are sort of raised. Yeah, really, really creepy.
I'm definitely going to check that out. But I do think that is the beauty of audio drama, because it really appeals to quiet horror, because it forces you to fill the gaps with your mind. When you're hearing it, your imagination can create something far more terrifying than I love films, and I love horror films. I'm a really big film buff. I run a film quiz, but I do think, reading horror and hearing horror is, I dare say, superior to watching horror.
And it is an art form, and again, it goes back to sort of being constricted by something and being very creative. Because if you wrote something that was like, oh, look at that monster over there, Bob. Which monster? Oh, yeah, the one with the 7 eyes and 25 teeth, and it's coming to us, and it's,
oh my God.
Do you know what I mean? You're sort of over-describing something. It just becomes terrible, but to write it so it's effective and it sounds like a genuine exchange between 2 people or whatever, and setting up the scenes so that they work and they've got the right number of people in there. And
do we have time for a quick reenactment? Because so I on Audible was looking for things that were about to come out, and they were about to release something called Horror on 4, which was apparently in Radio 4, and Radio 4 is bloody marvelous. But back in the 70s, they had released a series of horror radio plays presented by this guy as the Man in Black, and it's like, together at once in the new century, order now. So I downloaded it, and I started listening to it on the way to work the day it came out. And the first story was about a snowman, and here's how the scene goes. He had the sound of the mum doing dishes, and I was like, "Oh, Timothy, what are you doing in the kitchen?" Which is where I am. And guys, I am not over exaggerating here. And he's like, "Mummy, I want to build a snowman, but my brother has already made a snowman." "There's no snowman." "Yes, there is, Mummy. There's one in the garden. I'm looking out of the kitchen window right now, and I can see it." I was like, "Sweetheart, there's no snowman in the garden." It's like, "Mummy, but you're not looking." "But there isn't one." "Mummy, take 2 steps to the left." "Now can you see it, Mummy?" And she'd be like, "No, I don't see it. Look, Mummy, over there in the garden. I'm looking at the garden. By the bird bath, Mummy." "No, I'm not. I'm looking at the bird bath. To the left of the bird bath, Mummy. You're looking to the right of the bird bath, Mummy." And she's like, "Oh my God, there is a snowman. That's what I've been saying for 20 minutes, Mummy." And no, guys, that is how I found out Audible have a free exchange policy.
Oh gosh!
Wow!
And I am not over exaggerating. I bet there's someone out there who loves that story, but I couldn't finish it because of that scene in the kitchen.
So just to be clear, Mark, where was the snowman?
It was in the garden to the left of the third bath.
Oh man,
It was just
Brilliant.
And I was halfway through production of the podcast at this point. I thought, well, there goes my anxiety of the quality.
Yeah. That's absolutely fantastic.
Sorry
Absolutely.
to hijack the podcast
No,
there, guys.
no,
I'm
no.
so
it's
angry.
brilliant. No, it's brilliant. We were talking about public speaking at work. Again, just going off on a tangent, but we were talking about, doing presentations and stuff. And one of the guys said, I had real anxiety about stepping up and doing a talk in front of 200 people. He said, but then he went to, it was a conference somewhere, and basically, he's a television personality. I won't go into who he is, but he's like a fairly well-known sort of CEO of a company. And he came out, and everyone's like, "Oh wow, it's this quite famous guy." And then this fella just proceeded to do like the worst presentation that's ever been done. And he just kept looking at his notes, and he kept getting things mixed up, and he had cue cards. And at one point, he was literally reading from one of the slides, because he didn't know
Mark
it was
Zuckerberg.
it probably was. Yeah. But he said it just gave him so much confidence, because you see this very popular figure, who's known for public speaking, and he's just terrible at it.
Wow.
Well, you could just do so much better.
Mm.
Yeah.
I wouldn't quite, because I've talked enough. I'm letting you guys direct the conversation.
That killed that.
Next week, we discuss more public speaking. We also analyze Gary's offensive tweets. Gary, I only give you grief because one of the first tweets of yours I ever saw was that you had a story out somewhere, and you said, "Here's my new story, ready to be squirted all over your eager face." And I took a screen grab of your tweet and sent it to a friend and said, "I will never read any of this guy's stories."
Oh my god!
Because of that tweet.
Oh, that's fantastic. Hey, it worked. You got the publicity out there. You spread the word.
But I never read it.
Yeah, you probably did.
Oh my god!
And I've never published you on Shadows of the World.
Okay, there you go. Oh, that's why,
No, but Gary, we're friends, so I can call you out on it. And it's like, he's all right, guys. Just gross.
Yeah. Gosh. We're going to do an episode in the future about digital footprints and stuff, and
Wow, really?
Yeah.
You.
Yeah, exactly. About things that you can sort of put out there forever, and it goes back to the whole thing. Like, none of my friends and family are on Twitter, and it's like
I can tell.
Yeah. Not anymore. But no, I don't say that personally. Well, obviously you're a friend, but and you, Mark. But no one close to me is on Twitter. You just sort of sometimes you put some. I look back at some tweets and I'm like, my God, why did I do that? But then again, I don't know. I did it for a laugh, I suppose.
Of course, I'm just teasing, but that is the beauty of my particular neuroses, is that everything I do has this, oh God, why did I do that? So like,
yeah.
I even look at the stuff I'm treating shows that I think I'm a bit unprofessional, because I really struggle to, where does Mark end and Shadows at the Door begin? And should I use the account purely to be a vessel for a business? But then I feel like when I am myself more on it, people respond to it. But then if I want to if I want to completely geek out about Doctor Who, then I do try to do it on my personal one, for example.
Yeah. It's good, so what I like about your responses are they're so withering. It's fantastic. I'll put something really stupid out there, and I remember one time you put something like, I can't remember the exact wording of it, something along the lines of, thanks to everyone for being friends and being understanding, except you, Gary. You tagged me into it.
That was it. I remember that now.
Yeah, it was just so funny.
Yeah,
But
I think I saved the Picard facepalm meme on my phone for you.
Yeah, and one time you just put unfollowed after
Yeah.
And I did actually check to see if you'd unfollowed me. I was like, oh my God, I've not sent this guy.
Well, I've got to follow through. But
Yeah, but let's talk about Pooh, Mark. Come on. But no, we are going to one day talk about digital footprints and what the way you can be perceived online. It's one of the reasons why we've gone from a live format to sort of just pre-recording and sorting stuff out, because things can be taken so out of context sometimes, and I think it's quite important to maybe have that sort of QA process in there, the editing process, because what can sort of be an in-joke can sometimes be blown up out of all proportions. You just got to be really careful online because there's so many people out there.
I think, and one person might say that isn't healthy, but I think it's really good to, I'm a feminist, and there's an Instagram account out there called Awards for Good Boys, and it's a woman who will she'll do a fake award for I don't know, if a guy says, well, I don't rape people and I'm a man, she'll say good boy, and she'll call out men for wanting praise, for doing basic things, and I followed it for a long time. And I started feeling a little bit offended by them, and I thought, shit, because it's causing me to question myself a bit more. And I actually do think the account goes too far sometimes. So I did unfollow it, but
did you say unfollowed first?
I did not, because then she probably would have done an award and publicly shamed me. But I guess the point I'm making is that that perhaps was a bad example, but I think it is good to be challenged and to reassess all the time. I think if you have the same opinions now in your 30s that when you were in your late teens, I think you haven't evolved as a person. And I really pride myself on being, a different person to who I was, constantly analyzing and changing. And, there would have been a time where I would have retweeted a tweet about ejaculating a story onto somebody's face. But, I was 14, and Twitter wasn't around. That was harsh, actually. See what I mean? And I was just a bit mean. At the expense of a joke, I was mean to Gary. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. I'm going to go back and find that tweet and retweet it and tag you in it. I'm trying to remember what story it had been.
Years ago, I think.
It must have been, yeah. But no, I completely agree. It's you just got to be very, very careful. And what you put out there is potentially going to be out there, well, not forever, but for a very, very long time.
Well, the way I see it, my kids will they might find it one day. Every podcast I'm on, my kids will, hi kids, my kids may listen to it, one day and stuff like that. So.
Well, yeah, that's it, and I mean, it takes a lot to offend me, I think I reach the sort of offence level when it gets personal, when someone's trying to sort of purposefully upset you for the sake of purposefully upsetting you, that's when it sort of starts to offend me. But I do understand there are people out there that get offended a lot easier, and that's there's so many different types of people out there, all different ages and colours and creeds and different backgrounds, and it's really, really difficult to cater for everyone. But I think you've got to just do the best you can. I think that's what it is. And I think the problem with us doing the show live was we'd have a bit of banter, and there's the potential there for people to just misread it. There's for something more than it is, not having listened to previous podcasts sometimes.
But you're doing the right thing. You're knowing your audience. You're questioning yourselves. You're analysing. I think that's really good.
And it's great. I think you're like the first guest we've had sort of with the new. This is pre-recorded, but you're the first guest we've had to do it this way. And funny enough, there's not a lot I think Will's going to need to sort of remove. To be fair,
well, there was all those racial slurs at the beginning, Gary. You were having too much wine.
Besides that,
and cut.
I mean, we were talking about Pooh and The Simpsons, and you said some horrible stuff. I've already unfollowed you. Say, Gary, speaking as someone who edits his own podcast and their own banter with his other host, you have to be careful, because Will gets to decide which bits go in, which bits go out.
Yeah, that's it.
Who's going to look the funniest?
Absolutely. And I'm just really glad you didn't mention that I DM'd you saying, can I podcast all over your face? So,
And cut from here.
Well, David, who he records all the dialogue and stuff for the podcast. I obviously get a lot of unusual sounds from him. Like, I just like in one of the stories, the guy's jogging. So I said, David, can I get like 2 minutes of you panting so I can put it in the background of the race?
Yeah.
And then I can hear him on the thing going, okay. And then I have threatened him that I am slowly putting together the David Alt sex tape. Which maybe if we do a Patreon, it could be if the people
like a
want
bonus thing. Yeah,
definitely a bonus. Yeah, or I could
Absolutely.
blackmail him for when he gets rich, and I'm like, well, I have that podcast of that sex tape.
Oh, fantastic. So thanks very much for coming on, Mark. It's been a real pleasure to have you on, and best of luck with the podcast. Can you just remind everyone when the first episode is going to be?
Yes, certainly. And by the way, thank you so much for inviting me on. It's been a blast.
That's great.
So, Shadows at the Door, the podcast, comes out on Friday, the 21st of December. And there will then be a new episode once a week for 9 weeks. So,
fantastic.
And for Christmas.
Those who listen out there, definitely give it a blast. If you like M.R. James, if you like, as Mark described, quiet ghost stories that are very, very creepy, very Christmassy, give it a blast, give it a listen. I'm really looking forward to it.
Not
that they're all Christmas, but none of them have Christmas themes, but yes.
No. Yeah, hey, it doesn't have to be Christmas themed as opposed to be a Christmas ghost story, but the timing of it's fantastic.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you very much for coming on, and best of luck with it all, mate.
Thank you very much, Guy. And Guy, considering the amount of mulled wine you've been drinking, well done for keeping it intelligible.
Yeah. Well, what was quite funny is, as we were sort of talking earlier, my other half came in and she picked up the bottle of mulled wine, looked at it, saw there was like less than a quarter left in it, looked at me, frowned, put it down, and walked out of the room.
Oh man!
I would have taken it away. She's like, I've read your tweets.
Keep her away from my tweets.
Yeah.
Oh gosh. All right, guys, I'm going to go now anyway. But thanks very much, Mark. Cheers.
Thank you, guys. Take care.
Hey guys,
Bye-bye
take care.
now. Take care. Bye.